She didn't scream. That's what he remembered most. When Eliza Morgan stumbled through his gate at dawn barefoot and bleeding, her lips moved, but no sound came out. Silas Brennan had seen wounded soldiers at Shiloh men with their guts trailing behind them, still begging for their mothers. But this girl, 19 years old, with terror carved into her face, she didn't beg. She just whispered 6 words that stopped his heart. "My stepfather comes every night, sir." Before we go further, would you do something for me? Hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will restore your faith in mankind. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eliza's story travels. Now let's begin. Sir, the prairie didn't lie. That's what Silas's father used to say back before the war took him at Bull Run. The grasslands kept secrets better than any confessional held them close to the earth, where only God and the wind could hear. But that morning, June 14th, 1876, 3 weeks after Custer fell at Little Bighorn, the Wyoming plains spoke loud enough to wake a dead man's conscience. Silas was checking the fence line when he saw her. At first he thought it was a coyote, the way she moved low to the ground stumbling through the sagebrush. Then the sun hit her hair dark as a raven's wing matted with blood and dust, and he knew. A woman. Alone. Out here. He dropped the wire cutters and ran. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 6 days. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She collapsed before she reached the gate, just folded up like a paper doll, knees hitting the dirt, hands splaying out to catch herself. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn from collar to hem. One sleeve hung by threads, the other was gone entirely. Silas slowed as he approached. He'd learned in the war that scared things bite whether they got 4 legs or 2. "Easy now," he said, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "I ain't gonna hurt you." Her head snapped up, green eyes wide as a doe's before the shot. She tried to scramble backward, but her legs wouldn't hold her. "Please." The word came out broken, all breath and no voice. "Please don't send me back." "Back where?" She shook her head, wild, frantic. Her whole body trembled like aspen leaves in a storm. Silas knelt 6 feet away, keeping his hands visible, open, empty. "My name's Silas Brennan. This here's my ranch. You're safe." Safe. She repeated the word like she was testing it, seeing if it was real or just another lie. "There's no such thing as safe." "Maybe not. But you're on my land now, and I give you my word, ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Truth, maybe. Or permission to stop running. "My name's Eliza," she whispered. "Eliza Morgan." "Miss Morgan." He tipped his hat out of habit, even though they were both sitting in the dirt. "Can you stand?" I don't know." "Let me help you." He started to reach out, then stopped himself. "Is that all right? If I help you?" The fact that he asked that simple courtesy made her eyes fill with tears. She nodded. Silas moved slow, telegraphing every motion like he was approaching a wounded animal. When his hands closed around her upper arms, she flinched, but didn't pull away. She weighed nothing. He could feel every bone through her skin sharp as kindling. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. "I don't. Yesterday, maybe the day before." He got her to her feet, let her lean her full weight against him. Her head barely reached his shoulder. Up close, he could see the bruises, yellow-green and fading on her jaw. Fresh purple blooms on her collarbone. And worse things, he forced himself not to look at directly. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you inside." The walk to the cabin took forever. She moved like every step might be her last, like her body was held together with nothing but willpower and prayer. Twice she stopped, staring back toward the eastern horizon with pure terror on her face. "He's coming," she whispered the second time. "I know he's coming." "Who's coming?" Harrison, my stepfather. She spat the word like poison. He'll come for me. He always comes. Silas felt something old and cold settle in his gut. The same feeling he got at Gettysburg right before the artillery started. How far'd you run? 12 miles, maybe 15, I don't know. She looked down at her feet, bloody and torn. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, he'd catch me. 15 miles barefoot through prairie grass, tall enough to hide rattlesnakes. 15 miles with God knows what kind of injuries already on her. 15 miles at dawn when the coyotes were still hunting. You got grit, Miss Morgan, I'll give you that. I got desperation, Mr. Brennan. That's different. He couldn't argue with that. The cabin was small, one room, with a loft, a wood stove in the corner, and a bed he hadn't slept in since Mary died. He'd been sleeping in the barn for 5 years now, couldn't stand the way the empty mattress felt without her weight beside him. Sit, he said, guiding Eliza to the single chair by the table. She obeyed, moving stiff as an old woman. When he turned to the stove to heat water, she spoke again. Why are you helping me? Silas paused, his hand on the kettle. You need help. Most men wouldn't. Then most men are cowards. He filled the kettle from the pump, set it on the stove, and fed kindling into the firebox. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of catching flames and the distant call of a meadowlark outside. My husband was a coward, Silas said finally, not looking at her. During the war, I mean. I saw men run, saw them leave their brothers bleeding in the mud while they saved their own skins. He straightened, meeting her eyes. I swore I'd never be that kind of man. Your husband? Eliza's voice was soft, careful. You mean your wife? Yeah, Mary. The name still hurt to say out loud. Fever took her in 71. Our daughter Grace went the same night. She was 4 years old. I'm sorry. Me too. He found a clean cloth, dropped it in the heating water. Point is, Miss Morgan, I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it feels like when the world turns cruel and there ain't nobody to pull you back from the edge. So if I can be that hand for you, even just for today, then maybe Grace and Mary didn't die for nothing. Eliza started crying then. Not loud, not hysterical. Just silent tears tracking through the dust on her face, leaving clean lines down her cheeks. Silas let her cry. He wrung out the cloth, tested the temperature, and knelt beside her chair. I'm gonna clean these cuts now, he said. Some of them look deep. This is gonna hurt. Everything hurts already. I know, but I need you to tell me if I'm making it worse all right. She nodded, gripping the arms of the chair like it might fly away. He started with her feet. The soles were shredded, full of thorns and grass seeds and dried blood. Every time he touched her, she tensed, but she didn't cry out. Just bit her lip until it bled fresh. You can yell if you need to, Silas said. Ain't nobody out here to judge you for it. If I start yelling, I won't stop. He understood that too. As he worked picking debris from her wounds and wrapping them in clean strips of an old shirt, he asked questions. Gentle ones. The kind that didn't demand answers, but offered space for them. Where you from? St. Louis, originally. Long way from Missouri. My mother married Harrison 3 years ago. He wanted to move west, said there was opportunity here. Her voice went flat. Said he wanted a fresh start. And your mother? Dead. Cholera. Last winter. Silas paused, cloth in hand. So it's just you and him. Just me and him. She looked down at her hands, picking at a torn fingernail. At first he was kind. Played the grieving stepfather. Made sure I ate, asked about my day. Everyone in town thought he was a saint taking in his dead wife's daughter. Then one night about a month after Mama died, he came to my room. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 20 degrees. He said, her voice broke. She swallowed hard, forced the words out. He said now that Mama was gone, I had to take her place, in every way. Silas's hands stilled. The cloth dripped water onto the floorboards, pink with blood. Did he? Every night, Eliza whispered. Every single night for 14 months. I locked the door. He broke the lock. I pushed furniture against it. He was stronger. I tried to run before. He caught me. Beat me so bad I couldn't walk for a week. Then he... She closed her eyes. Then he did it anyway. Said if I couldn't walk, I couldn't run. The kettle started to whistle. Neither of them moved. Last night was different, she continued, her voice taking on a distant quality, like she was telling someone else's story. He came in drunk, drunker than usual, started saying how we should get married, make it legal, said he loved me, said God wanted us together. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I waited until he passed out. Then I took the kitchen knife, cut my hair short so he couldn't grab it, and I ran. The knife, Silas said carefully. Where is it now? I dropped it about 5 miles back, when I heard the riders. Riders. She met his eyes and he saw the terror there, fresh and sharp. He has men, 3 of them. They work for him, do whatever he says. I heard them calling my name in the dark like they were hunting deer. So I dropped the knife and ran faster. Silas stood, slowly walked to the window and scanned the horizon. Nothing but grass and sky and heat shimmer. But that didn't mean they weren't coming. Miss Morgan, he said, still watching the planes. I need to know something, and I need you to be honest. Did you hurt him? Before you ran? No. The answer was immediate, bitter. I thought about it. God help me, I stood over him with that knife for 10 full minutes thinking about all the ways I could make him stop. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't. I'm not a killer, Mr. Brennan. That don't make you weak. Doesn't it? Maybe if I'd been braver, I wouldn't have to run. Silas turned from the window. Running takes more courage than killing. Trust me on that. He went to the trunk at the foot of the bed. Mary's trunk still full of her things. He opened it, pulled out a dress. Plain calico, blue as cornflowers. Mary's favorite. Here, he said, offering it to Eliza. It'll be too big, but it's whole. You can change in the loft if you want privacy. She took the dress like it was made of spun gold, rubbing the fabric between her fingers. I can't take this. Yes, you can. Mary would have wanted you to have it. You don't even know me. I know enough. Eliza climbed the ladder to the loft, moving slow and painful. Silas turned away, giving her what privacy he could in the small space. He busied himself making coffee, real coffee, not the chicory substitute most folks drank out here. If there was ever a morning that called for the good stuff, this was it. Mr. Brennan. Her voice drifted down from above. Yeah. Thank you. Ain't done nothing yet. You treated me like a person, like I matter. That's more than most. The words hit him harder than any bullet. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, and forced himself to breathe steady. When she came down, the dress hung loose on her frame, but she'd cinched it with a piece of rope he kept for repairs. Her hair, what was left of it, stuck up in uneven tufts where she'd cut it. She looked like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Coffee, he offered. Please. They sat across from each other at the small table, 2 broken people drinking coffee, as the sun climbed higher and the day grew hot. Silas watched her wrap both hands around the tin cup, savoring the warmth despite the heat outside. What happens now? She asked. Now we wait. For what? For me to figure out the right thing to do. He took a sip, bitter and strong. You need a doctor. You need the law, and you need time to heal. Question is, how do we get you all 3 without that man catching up to you first? We can't. Eliza set down her cup. Harrison knows people, important people. The sheriff in Cheyenne plays cards with him every Thursday. The judge owes him money, and his men... She shuddered. His men are loyal because he pays them well. Too well. What about family? You got anybody else? My grandmother lives in Chicago, but I haven't seen her since I was 12. She didn't approve of Mama marrying Harrison. Said he was... She paused. Said he was dangerous. Smart woman. She was right. But I couldn't see it then. Mama couldn't see it either. Eliza's fingers tightened on the cup. He was so charming, so attentive. He'd bring her flowers and take her dancing and tell her she was beautiful. It wasn't until after the wedding that things changed. By then it was too late. Silas had seen that before too. Men who wore kindness like a mask, only taking it off once the trap was sprung. His own father-in-law had been that way, all smiles in public, all fists in private. Mary used to flinch when men raised their voices, even when they weren't angry. "Listen to me," he said, leaning forward. "I don't know your stepfather. I don't know his men or his money or his connections. But I know this land. I know these hills and these canyons and every hiding spot between here and Montana. And I know that out here the law ain't always about badges and judges. Sometimes it's about doing what's right, even when the world says you're wrong. What are you saying? I'm saying you're safe here until we figure out the next move, whether that takes a day or a week or a month. You're under my protection now." "Why would you do that? You don't owe me anything." Silas looked at her, really looked at her, saw past the bruises and the fear and the exhaustion. Saw a girl who'd run 15 miles barefoot through hostile country rather than spend one more night being hurt. Saw the kind of strength that didn't come from muscles or weapons, but from something deeper. Something that wouldn't break no matter how hard the world tried. "Maybe I don't owe you," he said quietly. "But I owe Mary, and I owe Grace, and I owe every man who died next to me in the war believing they were fighting for something good. If I can't help one scared girl find safety, then what the hell was it all for?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears again. "I don't know how to repay you." "Don't want repayment, just want you to survive." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind and the distant cattle and the beating of their own hearts. Then Silas stood. "I'm gonna ride out to the ridge, make sure nobody's coming. You stay inside, keep the door barred. There's a rifle by the bed, you know how to shoot." "No." "Then leave it alone. You're more likely to shoot yourself than anybody else." He grabbed his hat from the peg. "I'll be back before noon. If I ain't back by sundown." He paused. "If I ain't back by sundown, you take the horse in the barn. The bay mare, she's gentle, and you ride north. Follow the river until you hit Fort Laramie. Tell them you need to speak to Colonel Chambers. He served with me in the war. He'll help you." "Mr. Brennan." "Silas. Just call me Silas." "Silas." She stood steadying herself on the table. "Please be careful." He almost smiled. "Careful's kept me alive this long. Don't plan on changing now." But as he swung into the saddle and pointed his horse toward the high ground, Silas knew careful might not be enough. Not against men who hunted women for sport. Not against a monster wearing a gentleman's face. The ridge gave him a clear view 15 miles in every direction. He dismounted, pulled out his father's spyglass, and scanned the horizon. There. 4 riders moving fast from the southeast. Too far to make out faces, but close enough to know they weren't friendly. Nobody rode that hard, unless they were chasing something or running from something. And out here, there was nothing to run from, except conscience. Silas watched them for 10 minutes, tracking their path. They were heading straight for his ranch, following Eliza's trail like bloodhounds. One of them, the leader riding a big black stallion, kept stopping to check the ground, making sure they hadn't lost the track. Professionals, or close enough to it. Silas collapsed the spyglass and remounted. He had maybe 2 hours before they reached his property. 2 hours to decide if he was really ready to die for a girl he'd met 3 hours ago. The answer came easier than he expected. Yeah, he was. Because if he didn't stand for her, who would? If he let evil ride onto his land and take her back to hell without putting up a fight? Then, what was the point of surviving the war? What was the point of living at all? He kicked his horse into a gallop, racing the sun and the riders and his own mortality. When he burst through the cabin door, Eliza jumped up from the chair, terror written across her face. "They're coming," Silas said, already moving to the gun cabinet. "4 of them, maybe 90 minutes out." The color drained from her face. "Oh God! Oh God! I should have kept running. I should have—" "Stop." He pulled down his Winchester, checked the chamber, started loading rounds. "You did the right thing. If you'd kept running, they would have caught you in the open. At least here we got walls and cover." She stared at him. "You're going to fight them." "Damn right I am." "They'll kill you." "Maybe." He grabbed his gun belt, strapped it on. The weight of the Colt Peacemaker on his hip felt right, like coming home after a long journey. "But they'll have to work for it. Silas, please." She crossed to him, grabbed his arm. "Just tell them I'm not here. Tell them I kept moving west. They'll believe you. And then what? They keep hunting you until they catch you, or you die of thirst somewhere out in the Badlands." He shook his head. "No, this ends today." How does this end with you still breathing?" He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up to her face. For the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something besides fear in her eyes. Concern. For him. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know running don't solve nothing. I know that evil only wins when good men turn away. And I know—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know that Mary and Grace would be ashamed of me if I let that bastard take you back. So I'm gonna make a stand. And God willing, we'll both live to see tomorrow." Eliza's grip tightened. "Then I'm helping." "No." "Yes, it's my fight, Silas. My life. I won't hide while you die for me." "You don't know how to shoot." "Then teach me." He started to argue, then stopped. Saw the set of her jaw, the steel in her spine. She'd run 15 miles barefoot. She'd survived 14 months of hell. She wasn't fragile. She was forged. "All right," he said. "But you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. Understood?" "Understood." He handed her his backup pistol, a smaller .38 revolver that Mary used to carry when she went into town. "This is the safety. This is the hammer. You pull the trigger, it'll kick hard. Don't fight it. Just let it happen and aim again." She held the gun like it might bite her. "It won't save you if they get close," Silas continued. "But it might buy you a second, and a second's all you need to run. I'm done running. If I go down, you run. That's the deal." She met his eyes, and he saw his own determination reflected back. "If you go down, I'm right behind you." Before he could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the plains. Slow, deliberate. The sound of men who knew their prey was cornered. Silas moved to the window, peered through the gap in the curtains. 4 riders had stopped at his gate, horses stamping and blowing in the heat. The man on the black stallion dismounted. He was tall, well-dressed for the frontier, tailored coat, polished boots. A silver watch chain glinting in the sun. Handsome in the way snakes are handsome, all smooth lines and cold eyes. Harrison Whitmore. Had to be. "Eliza?" He called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Smooth as honey, friendly as a preacher. "Eliza, sweetheart. I know you're in there. Come on out now. Let's talk about this." Beside Silas, Eliza had gone rigid, her breathing shallow and fast. "It's all right," Silas murmured. "He can't see you. He can't hurt you." "You don't understand." His voice. She was shaking now, full body tremors. "That's the voice. The one he uses before he... Silas stepped away from the window, positioned himself between her and the door. "Look at me. Eliza, look at me." She dragged her eyes up to his face. "He's not getting through that door," Silas said. "You hear me? He's not getting to you, I promise. Mr. Brennan. Harrison's voice again louder now. I don't believe we've met. My name is Harrison Whitmore. That's my daughter you've got in there. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. The girl's not well prone to flights of fancy. If you'd just send her out, we can all go home peacefully. Silas glanced back out the window. The three men with Harrison had spread out hands resting on their gun belts. Professional positioning. They'd done this before. He's lying, Eliza whispered fiercely. He'll tell you I'm crazy, that I'm making it up, that... I know. Silas checked his Winchester one more time. I know exactly what he is. He moved to the door, cracked it open just enough to shout through. Miss Morgan's not going anywhere with you, Whitmore. Now get off my land before I help you off. Silence. Then laughter. Harrison's laugh smooth and cultured and absolutely devoid of warmth. My friend, you're making a mistake. A serious mistake. That girl is my legal ward. I have papers. I have rights. You're harboring a runaway, which is a crime. Now I don't want trouble, but then leave. I can't do that. Then I guess we got trouble. Silas shut the door, threw the bolt, turned to Eliza, who stood in the center of the room, looking like she might shatter. Listen to me, he said urgently. I'm going to go out the back, try to circle around. You stay here, keep that gun ready. If anybody comes through that door who ain't me, you shoot them. Don't think, don't hesitate, just shoot. What if I miss? Then shoot again. He moved to the back window, the one that faced the barn. If he could make it there, he'd have cover and a clear line of fire to the front yard. Silas. Eliza's voice stopped him. Thank you for believing me. He looked back at her, 19 years old and carrying wounds that would never fully heal, standing in his dead wife's dress with a gun in her hand and terror in her eyes. Somebody should have believed you a long time ago, he said. Now stay down. Then he slipped out the window and into the heat of the Wyoming sun, where four men waited to decide if today was the day Silas Brennan finally joined his wife and daughter in whatever came after this life. The barn smelled like hay and horse sweat and old leather. Silas pressed himself against the back wall, Winchester ready, listening. Voices drifted from the front yard. Harrison was still talking, his tone reasonable and patient. The voice of a man who always got what he wanted. Don't want anyone to get hurt. Just send the girl out. We can forget this whole unfortunate incident. One of the other men, younger, eager-sounding, interrupted. Boss, we could just rush the place. It's one old man. Patience Clay. Harrison's voice took on an edge. Mr. Brennan has done nothing wrong. Yet. Perhaps he simply needs more incentive to be reasonable. Silas shifted position, trying to get a visual through the barn slats. He could see Harrison standing by the cabin door, hands clasped behind his back like a schoolteacher. The three others had fanned out, one by the well, one near the chicken coop, one circling toward the back. Smart. They were cutting off escape routes. The young one, Clay, was the wild card. He kept touching his gun, eager, nervous energy rolling off him. Men like that were dangerous because they were unpredictable. They'd shoot before thinking, and then everyone died. Silas aimed through the gap in the boards, centered his sights on Harrison's chest. One shot. That's all it would take. Drop the leader and the others might scatter. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then he hesitated. Because killing a man in self-defense was one thing. Shooting a man in the back while he stood talking was another. Even if that man deserved it. Even if the world would be better off without him. The war had taught Silas a lot of things, but the most important lesson was this: once you cross certain lines, you can't uncross them. Once you become the thing you're fighting against, you've already lost. He lowered the rifle. Last chance, Mr. Brennan, Harrison called out. Send her out, or my men start getting creative. Maybe we burn your barn. Maybe we shoot your livestock. Maybe you ride off while you still can. The voice came from behind them all. A woman's voice, hard as iron and twice as cold. Silas risked a look. A rider sat mounted on a gray gelding just outside the gate. A woman in dark trousers and a marshal's badge pinned to her vest. She held a rifle across her saddle, casual but ready. Marshal Ruth Calloway. Silas had heard of her. Everyone in Wyoming had. She'd tracked down the Ketchum gang single-handed last year, brought them in alive despite having a bullet in her leg the whole time. Harrison turned his smile, never slipping. Marshal Calloway, what a pleasant surprise. Don't marshal me, Whitmore. I know who you are. She swung down from her horse, keeping the rifle pointed in his general direction. Got a telegram this morning from Fort Laramie. Seems Colonel Chambers received some concerning information about a man matching your description. Said if I was in the area, I might want to check on a young woman named Eliza Morgan. Harrison's smile tightened. I don't know what lies you've been told, Marshal, but that girl is your stepdaughter. I know. And according to the Colonel's source, you've been abusing her for over a year. Ruth stepped closer, her voice dropping to something deadly. Now I'm a reasonable woman. I believe in due process. So here's what's going to happen. You and your boys are going to ride back to Cheyenne. Miss Morgan is going to give a statement. Doc Patterson is going to examine her. And then we'll see what a jury thinks of you. You have no authority. I have a badge and a rifle, Whitmore. That's all the authority I need out here. She raised her voice. Mr. Brennan, you in the barn. Silas stood slowly, rifle still ready. I'm here. The girl safe. She's safe. Good. Keep her that way while I deal with these gentlemen. Harrison's face had gone cold. All pretense dropped. You're making a mistake, Marshal. I have friends, powerful friends. Your career will be... My career will be just fine. Ruth cocked her rifle, a sharp metallic click that echoed across the yard. But yours is over. Now mount up before I decide you're resisting arrest. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air felt thick, charged, like right before lightning strikes. Silas watched Clay's hand hover over his gun, saw the calculation in his eyes. Don't, Silas called out to him. Ain't worth dying for his money. Clay looked at Harrison, then at Ruth, then at the rifle in Silas's hands. He raised his hands, slowly stepped back. Smart boy, Ruth said. Harrison's face twisted with rage. This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A coward who preys on helpless girls. Ruth's voice could have cut glass. Now you got to the count of 3 to get on that horse, or I shoot you for resisting. 1. Harrison mounted his movements, jerky with suppressed fury. 2. The other 3 men scrambled for their horses. Ruth never got to 3. They rode out in a cloud of dust, Harrison looking back once with a promise of violence in his eyes. But he rode. Silas waited until they were specks on the horizon before lowering his rifle. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline, finally releasing. Ruth walked over to the barn. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 35, with gray streaking her dark hair and scars on her hands that told their own stories. Mr. Brennan, she nodded. Marshal, he nodded back. Timing's pretty convenient. Ain't convenient. It's intentional. She glanced at the cabin. Colonel Chambers sent word 3 days ago. Said an old friend might need help. Took me this long to ride out from Cheyenne. The Colonel... Silas felt something loosen in his chest. How'd he know? Didn't say. Just said to keep an eye on you. That you had a habit of finding trouble. She almost smiled. Guess he was right. The cabin door opened. Eliza stood in the doorway, still holding the pistol, looking like she might collapse at any moment. Miss Morgan, Ruth said gently. I'm Marshal Ruth Calloway. You're safe now. Eliza's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then her knees buckled. Silas dropped his rifle and caught her before she hit the ground. She was crying silent, shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and dark, and finally starting to see light. I got you, Silas murmured. I got you. Ruth watched for a moment, then quietly retrieved her horse. I'll make camp at the creek. Give you folks some privacy. Tomorrow we ride to Cheyenne, get the doc to examine her, make this official. But tonight..." She looked at Eliza, something soft and sad in her eyes. "Tonight, let her rest." She rode off toward the tree line, leaving Silas holding a broken girl as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. "Is it really over?" Eliza whispered against his shoulder. "The running part is. The rest." He helped her back inside, eased her into the chair. "The rest is just beginning. But you won't do it alone." She looked up at him, tears still streaming. Why did you do this?" Silas knelt beside her the same way he had that morning when she'd first told him the truth. "Because somebody had to. Because Mary would have done the same. Because..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Because the world's full of men like Harrison. And if the rest of us don't stand up, if we don't say, 'Not here, not today, not on my watch,' then we're just as guilty as he is." Eliza reached out, took his weathered hand in her own. "I'll never forget this. Never. Don't need you to forget, just need you to survive. And then..." He smiled, tired but real. "Then you thrive." Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying away the last echoes of the day's violence. Tomorrow would bring statements and examinations, and the slow machinery of justice. But tonight, for the first time in 14 months, Eliza Morgan fell asleep without fear. And in the barn, Silas Brennan sat with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch, doing what good men have always done, standing between the innocent and the wolves. The desert had kept its secrets for a long time, but tonight it had spoken. And the whole territory would hear. Dawn came cold and bright, the kind of Wyoming morning that made everything look clean, even when it wasn't. Silas had been awake for 3 hours, sitting on the porch with coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the eastern horizon like it might betray him. His shoulder ached where the old war wound lived, the one that predicted weather and trouble with equal accuracy. Right now, it was screaming both. Inside, Eliza was still sleeping. He'd checked on her twice during the night, standing at the bottom of the loft ladder, like a sentry listening to make sure her breathing stayed steady. The third time he'd climbed halfway up, she'd been crying in her sleep, small wounded sounds that made his chest hurt. He'd started to wake her, then stopped. Sometimes nightmares were safer than memories. Ruth emerged from the tree line at first light, her gray gelding picking its way carefully through the morning dew. She dismounted at the gate, tied her horse, and walked up to the porch with the kind of deliberate calm that made Silas think of loaded guns. "She awake?" Ruth asked. "Not yet." "Good. Gives us time to talk." She sat on the porch rail, her badge catching the early light. "What you did yesterday, standing between her and those men that took guts. Stupid guts, but guts all the same. Didn't feel like I had a choice." "There's always a choice. You chose right." She pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open. "But now comes the hard part. Getting her testimony on record, getting Doc Patterson to document the injuries, and then..." She paused. "Then we have to make it stick." "Thought you said it was over." "I said the running was over. Didn't say getting justice would be easy." Ruth tapped her pencil against the notebook. "Harrison Whitmore isn't just some backwater brute. He owns half the commercial properties in Cheyenne, sits on the town council, has dinner with the territorial governor once a month. Men like that don't go down without a fight." Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. "You saying he'll get away with it? I'm saying we need everything perfect. Her testimony has to be clear. The medical evidence has to be documented. And we need witnesses, anyone who saw bruises, heard arguments, anything that corroborates her story." "What about what I saw, the condition she was in when she got here?" "That helps, but you didn't see him do it. You saw the aftermath." Ruth closed the notebook. "Look, I believe her. You believe her. But a jury. They'll hear a wealthy pillar of the community versus a hysterical stepdaughter. They'll hear his lawyers talk about her running away, about her making false accusations to avoid responsibility. They'll paint her as a liar and him as a victim. That's horseshit." "That's the law." Ruth's voice went hard. Or at least how men twist it when they got money and connections. So we can't give them any openings. Her story has to be ironclad. The door opened behind them. Eliza stood there in Mary's dress, her short hair sticking up at angles, her face pale but determined. Then let's make it ironclad. Ruth nodded respectfully. Miss Morgan, did you sleep? Some. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. I heard what you said, about needing everything perfect. Didn't mean for you to hear that. I'm glad I did. Eliza stepped onto the porch, and Silas noticed she moved easier this morning, like some of the pain had dulled overnight. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of hiding. If telling my story is what it takes, then let's do it. Ruth studied her for a long moment. It won't be easy. You'll have to say things out loud that you probably want to forget. You'll have to describe what he did in detail. And if this goes to trial, you'll have to say it all again in front of a courtroom full of strangers. I know. Some of those strangers will look at you like you're lying. Like you deserved it. Like you're just a girl trying to ruin a good man's name. I know that too. And when it's over, win or lose, people will remember your name. They'll remember what happened to you. That kind of shame. Shame. Eliza's voice cut like a blade. I'm not the one who should be ashamed. He is. And if telling the truth means people know what kind of monster Harrison Whitmore really is, then good. Let them know. Let everyone know. Ruth smiled small and fierce. All right then. Let's ride. The journey to Cheyenne took most of the day. Ruth led Eliza, rode Mary's old mare, and Silas brought up the rear on his bay, his Winchester across his saddle, and his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Every time they crested a ridge, he half expected to see Harrison and his men waiting. But the plains stayed empty, just grass and wind, and the occasional antelope watching them pass. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat the biscuits Silas had packed. Eliza sat apart from them, staring east toward the mountains, and Silas wondered what she was thinking. Was she scared? Relieved planning what she'd say to the doctor. Ruth must have been wondering the same thing, because she walked over and sat beside the girl. Silas stayed back, giving them space, but the wind carried their voices. You holding up? Ruth asked. I don't know. Ask me after. Fair enough. Ruth pulled out her canteen, offered it. Can I tell you something? Please. When I was 16, my uncle came to live with us. My father's brother, just back from the war, nowhere else to go. Ruth's voice went flat distant. He used to watch me, all the time. The way a wolf watches a rabbit. My mother saw it, I think, but she never said anything. Then one night he came into my room. Eliza turned to look at her, eyes wide. I fought, Ruth continued. Scratched his face so deep he had scars for years. Screamed loud enough to wake my father. And you know what my father did? He beat me, said I was lying, said I was trying to cause trouble because I was jealous of the attention my uncle got. Threw me out of the house in my nightgown and told me not to come back until I learned to stop making up stories. Oh God. I was homeless for 3 months, slept in barns, stole food, did things I'm not proud of just to survive. Then I met a woman, a former cavalry scout, who taught me to shoot, to track, to fight. She's the one who told me I could be more than a victim. I could be the one who stops it from happening to others. Eliza was crying now, quiet tears tracking down her face. So when I say I believe you, Ruth said, I mean it. When I say I'll fight for you, I mean that too. Because nobody fought for me. And I'll be damned if I let that happen to another girl on my watch. Eliza threw her arms around Ruth's neck, sobbing into her shoulder. Ruth held her tight, one hand smoothing her choppy hair, whispering things Silas couldn't hear. He turned away, giving them privacy, and found himself thinking about Mary. She would have liked Ruth, would have respected her strength, her refusal to let the world break her. Mary had been strong too, in quieter ways. When Grace was born blue and not breathing, Mary had breathed life back into her lungs, while Silas stood frozen. When the fever came, Mary had held their daughter through the shaking and the delirium, singing lullabies until her voice gave out. Strength came in different forms. Sometimes it was standing between a girl and her abuser with a rifle. Sometimes it was simply surviving another day. They reached Cheyenne as the sun touched the western peaks. The town was bigger than Silas remembered. More buildings, more people, more noise. The smell of coal smoke and horse manure and frying meat filled the air. Music spilled from saloons even though it wasn't yet dark. Ruth led them straight to Doc Patterson's office, a small building near the center of town, with a sign that read, W. Patterson, Physician and Surgeon. The windows glowed with lamplight. "He's expecting us," Ruth said, dismounting. "I sent a telegram ahead." Inside the office smelled like carbolic acid and old leather. Doc Patterson was older than Silas expected, maybe 70, with white hair and gentle hands that shook slightly. But his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "Marshall," he greeted Ruth. "And this must be Miss Morgan." Eliza nodded, mute suddenly, all her earlier bravery seeming to evaporate. "I'm going to examine you, Miss Morgan," Doc Patterson said softly. "Document your injuries for the marshal's report. It won't hurt, but it might be uncomfortable. You can have the marshal stay with you if you'd like." "Please," Eliza whispered. Silas waited outside with his hat in his hands, pacing the wooden sidewalk. People passed, giving him curious looks, a rancher in dusty trail clothes, armed and agitated. He didn't care. Inside that room, Eliza was reliving her nightmare, so the law could maybe possibly, if the stars aligned, and justice wasn't totally broken, hold a monster accountable. The examination took an hour. When the door finally opened, Eliza emerged pale and shaking. Ruth had one arm around her shoulders, holding her up. "Mr. Brennan," Doc Patterson called. "A word." Silas followed him into the office. The doctor sat heavily at his desk, pulled off his spectacles, and rubbed his eyes. "I've been practicing medicine for 43 years, he said. "Seen every kind of injury imaginable. War wounds, industrial accidents, domestic violence. But what that man did to that child..." He put his spectacles back on, met Silas's eyes. "If half of what the physical evidence suggests is true, Harrison Whitmore should hang. Will he? That's up to the courts, but I'll document everything. Every bruise, every scar, every sign of repeated trauma. If the prosecutor does his job, the evidence will speak for itself. And if he doesn't..." Doc Patterson's expression went grim. "Then we pray for a better world than the one we got." They lodged that night at a boarding house near the church. Ruth had an arrangement with the owner, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions and charged half price for women in trouble. Eliza got her own room with a lock on the inside. Ruth took the room next door. Silas slept in the common room downstairs with his rifle watching the door. He must have dozed off sometime near dawn, because the next thing he knew, sunlight was streaming through the window and Ruth was shaking his shoulder. "He's here," she said quietly. Silas sat up fast, reaching for his gun. "Harrison and his lawyer. They're at the marshal's office demanding I release her into his custody." Ruth's jaw was tight. "We need to move fast. I'm taking her to the courthouse to give her statement to Judge Morrison. He's fair, doesn't owe Whitmore anything. But we have to go now before Harrison gets a court order." "He can do that. If he finds the right judge, yeah. There's 3 in this town. One's honest, one's bought, one's incompetent. We need to get to Morrison first." They woke. Eliza explained the situation while she dressed. She didn't cry or panic, just nodded, and followed them into the street. The morning was cool, the town just waking up. Shopkeepers swept sidewalks. A milk wagon rattled past. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the world wasn't about to decide whether a monster walked free. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building that smelled like old paper and tobacco smoke. Judge Morrison's chambers were on the 2nd floor, accessed by a narrow staircase that creaked under their boots. Morrison himself was a compact man with iron gray hair and reading spectacles perched on his nose. He listened to Ruth's explanation without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "Miss Morgan," he said when Ruth finished, "you understand the gravity of what you're alleging." "Yes, sir." "You understand that bearing false witness is a crime." "I'm not lying." "I believe you're telling the truth as you understand it. But the law requires more than belief. It requires evidence." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." So she did. And Silas, standing in the corner with Ruth, listened to Eliza describe in clinical detail the 14 months of hell she'd endured. She didn't cry, didn't dramatize, just spoke in a flat, exhausted voice about the first time Harrison came to her room, about how she'd tried to lock him out and he'd broken the lock, about the nights he'd been drunk and violent, and the nights he'd been sober and methodical, and how both were terrible in different ways. Judge Morrison's expression never changed, but Silas saw his hands tighten on his pen until the knuckles went white. "Did you tell anyone?" Morrison asked. "Your mother, before she died, friends a pastor." "I tried. I told Mama, but she was already sick. She said I must have misunderstood, that Harrison would never. She died thinking I was lying." "Anyone else?" "I told Mrs. Keller, our neighbor. She said I was being dramatic. That I should be grateful Harrison took me in after Mama died." Eliza's voice cracked. "So I stopped telling. Because nobody believed me. Because he was too important, too respected." "But you believed Mr. Brennan would believe you." "No, I didn't think about it. I just ran. And when I got to his ranch, I was going to keep running. But he—" She looked at Silas, and something in her expression made his chest hurt. "He treated me like a person. Like what I said mattered. So I stayed." Morrison wrote for several minutes, his pen scratching across paper. Finally, he looked up. "Miss Morgan, I'm going to issue a temporary order of protection. Harrison Whitmore is not to come within 100 yards of you pending a formal hearing. I'm also ordering the sheriff to investigate these allegations thoroughly." "What about charging him?" Ruth asked. "I need the sheriff's report first, but based on this testimony and Doc Patterson's medical report—" He removed his spectacles, cleaned them slowly. "Based on that, I'd say there's sufficient cause for an arrest warrant." Eliza sagged in her chair. "Thank you. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. The trial, if it comes to that, will be brutal. His lawyers will try to destroy your credibility. They'll dig into your past. Twist your words, make you out to be a vindictive child with an axe to grind. I know. And they might win. Juries are unpredictable, especially when the defendant is wealthy and connected. I don't care. At least I'll have tried." Morrison smiled, small and sad. "You're braver than most, Miss Morgan. The world needs more of that." They left the courthouse through the back entrance to avoid the small crowd that had gathered in front. Word traveled fast in a town this size. Ruth led them down an alley, circling back toward the boarding house. They were halfway there when 3 men stepped out of a doorway, blocking their path. Silas recognized one of them from yesterday, Clay, the young, eager one who'd almost drawn on him. The other 2 were new, bigger and meaner looking. "Well, well," Clay drawled, hand resting on his gun. "If it ain't the crazy girl and her protectors." Ruth stepped forward, her own hand dropping to her sidearm. "Out of the way, boys. You don't want this fight." "Maybe we do. Maybe Mr. Whitmore's real interested in having a conversation with his stepdaughter." "She's got a protection order." "That right. Funny I don't see the sheriff enforcing it." Clay smiled, ugly and confident. "See, the sheriff's an old friend of Mr. Whitmore's. Plays poker with him every Thursday. Real good friends. So maybe that order ain't worth the paper it's written on." Silas moved beside Ruth, his hand on his Colt. Behind them, Eliza had gone rigid with fear, but she didn't run, didn't hide, just stood there with her chin up, refusing to be cowed. "Last chance," Ruth said quietly. "Walk away." "Or what? You gonna shoot us in the middle of town, in front of witnesses?" Clay gestured to the windows above them where faces had appeared watching. "Go ahead. Make yourself a murderer. See how long you keep that badge. He was right, and they all knew it. Ruth couldn't draw without cause, not here, not with people watching, and the moment she hesitated, they'd won. But Ruth was smarter than that. "You're right," she said, stepping back. "I'm not going to shoot you." She raised her voice, projecting to the windows. "Everyone hear that. These men are threatening a woman under court protection. They're doing it on behalf of Harrison Whitmore, who's under investigation for rape and assault. I want all of you to remember what you saw here today." The faces in the windows shifted, murmuring. Suddenly the crowd wasn't just watching, they were witnesses. Clay's smile faltered. "You can't what? Tell the truth." Ruth pulled out her notebook, made a show of writing. Clay Hewitt making threats in violation of a court order, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. That's 10 years at minimum. You got no proof I was threatening. I got witnesses. Ruth gestured to the windows. 24 of them. Now step aside, or I'll add resisting arrest to the charges. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the bigger men grabbed Clay's arm. "Come on, this ain't worth it." They backed off slowly, keeping their hands visible. But Clay's eyes stayed on Eliza, full of promise. "This ain't over, girl. Mr. Whitmore always gets what he wants." "Not this time," Eliza said, and her voice didn't shake at all. They disappeared around the corner. Ruth let out a long breath, her hand finally leaving her gun. "That was close," Silas muttered. "That was a warning. Harrison's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous." She turned to Eliza. "From now on, you don't go anywhere without one of us. Understand?" "Understood." They made it back to the boarding house without further incident. Mrs. Chen had hot tea waiting and a look on her face that said she'd heard what happened. "Men like that," she said in her precise, accented English. "They think women are property, things to be owned. But my grandmother had a saying, 'The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists.' You bend today, Miss Morgan, but you do not break. And when the storm passes, you stand tall again." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. No thanks needed. We women, we must help each other. The men, they have their laws and their judges and their courts. We have only each other." That night, Silas sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the street. Ruth joined him after Eliza had gone to bed, bringing 2 cups of coffee that tasted like it had been boiling since noon. "She's stronger than she looks," Ruth said. "Has to be. To survive what she survived." "True. But there's surviving, and then there's living. Question is, when this is all over, will she be able to do the second?" Silas thought about Mary, about the way she'd lived with her own father's violence even after she left home. How sometimes she'd flinch at shadows, how she'd needed all the doors locked even in their remote cabin. "She'll have scars," he said, "but scars mean you healed. Wounds mean you're still bleeding." "You planning to stick around, help her heal?" "Long as she needs me to." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You're a good man, Silas Brennan." "Just a man trying to do right. That's what makes you good." She stood, drained her coffee. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow the sheriff's supposed to deliver his report. If Morrison likes what he sees, Harrison gets arrested. If not—" She trailed off. If not, we figure out another way, because that girl's not going back to him. Not while I'm breathing." Silas watched her go inside, then turned his attention back to the street. Somewhere out there, Harrison Whitmore was planning his next move. Somewhere, men like Clay were sharpening their knives and checking their guns. But here in this moment, Eliza was safe. And tomorrow, they'd fight again. That's all any of them could do. Fight and hope, and refuse to let evil win without one hell of a struggle. The stars came out cold and distant. Silas thought about Mary and Grace, wondered if they were up there watching. Wondered if they approved of what he was doing. He liked to think they did. He liked to think that somewhere in whatever came after this life, his wife was smiling at him for finally finding a purpose beyond just surviving. The night deepened. The town quieted. And Silas Brennan kept his vigil, one hand on his rifle, watching over a girl who'd lost everything but refused to lose herself. The sheriff's report came 3 days later, delivered by a deputy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Ruth read it standing in Judge Morrison's chambers, while Silas and Eliza waited in the hall, and when she came out, her face told them everything they needed to know. "Insufficient evidence," she said, her voice flat and controlled. "Sheriff claims there's no corroboration, no witnesses to the actual assaults, and that Miss Morgan's injuries could have been sustained during her flight from Cheyenne." Eliza made a sound like she'd been punched. "But Doc Patterson's report doesn't prove who caused the injuries. That's what the sheriff says anyway." Ruth's jaw was so tight Silas thought it might crack. "He's recommending no charges be filed." "That's insane," Silas said. "The girl ran 15 miles barefoot to get away from him." "Running doesn't prove assault. Could prove she's unstable according to the sheriff. Could prove she had a fight with her stepfather and overreacted." Ruth crumpled the paper in her fist. "It's garbage, and we all know it, but the sheriff's bought and paid for. Has been for years." "So that's it." Eliza's voice climbed. "Harrison just walks away." "Not if I have anything to say about it." Ruth strode back into Morrison's chambers without knocking. Silas and Eliza followed. Judge Morrison was standing at his window looking out over the street. He turned when they entered, and Silas saw resignation in his eyes. "You read it," Morrison said. It wasn't a question. "Every lying word of it." Ruth slammed the report on his desk. "Judge, with all due respect, this is a whitewash. The sheriff didn't investigate, he covered up." "I agree." "Then issue the warrant anyway. We've got Doc Patterson's report. We've got Miss Morgan's testimony. And we've got a sheriff who says the evidence doesn't support criminal charges. If I issue a warrant against his recommendation, Harrison's lawyers will have it dismissed before lunch. They'll claim I'm overstepping, that I'm making a political decision rather than a legal one." Morrison sat heavily. "I can't win that fight. Not against a man with Harrison Whitmore's resources. So we just give up." Eliza stepped forward, her hands balled into fists. "Let him get away with it." "I didn't say that." Morrison pulled out a different file. "There's more than one kind of justice, Miss Morgan. Criminal charges require proof beyond reasonable doubt. But civil cases, those only need a preponderance of evidence. You could sue him. File for emancipation on the grounds of abuse. It wouldn't put him in prison, but it would free you from his custody permanently." "How long would that take?" Ruth asked. "Months, maybe a year." Morrison looked at Eliza. "And you'd need to stay away from him the whole time. If he got his hands on you before the hearing, he'd kill me." Eliza said it matter-of-factly. "Or make me disappear. Either way, I'd never testify." The room fell silent. Outside, a dog barked. Somewhere, a church bell rang noon. "There's another option," Silas said slowly. All three of them turned to look at him. "Marriage." Ruth frowned. "What are you talking about?" "If Eliza was married, Harrison would lose his legal claim on her. She'd be her husband's responsibility, not her stepfather's." "That's medieval," Ruth said. "That's the law." Morrison was nodding. "He's right. Marriage would terminate the guardianship immediately. Harrison would have no legal standing." "But who would marry me?" Eliza asked. "I don't have any money I can't offer." "I would." Silas heard himself say the words before he'd fully thought them through. "If you're willing. It wouldn't have to be real, not in the way most marriages are. Just legal. Just protection." Eliza stared at him. "You can't be serious." "Why not? I've got a ranch, a name without scandal attached to it. We get married, Harrison's claim is void, and you're free to file for divorce once this all settles down." "That's fraud," Ruth said. "Marriage fraud. Only if we admit it. Far as anyone else knows, we fell in love during her recovery. Decided to make it official." Silas turned to Morrison. "Would that work, legally?" "It would terminate the guardianship. Yes. And Harrison couldn't challenge it. She's 19, old enough to marry without consent. If she has a husband, she doesn't need a guardian." Morrison looked at Eliza. "But Miss Morgan, you understand this would mean—" Freedom, Eliza interrupted. It would mean freedom, I understand. There would be talk. People would say you trapped him, that you're a gold digger, that... Let them talk. I've been called worse. She looked at Silas, searching his face. Are you sure about this? You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave. I know you deserve better than what you got. And I know that if Mary was here, she'd tell me to do this without hesitation. Mary was your wife. Yeah, and she taught me that sometimes the right thing is the hard thing. Sometimes you gotta put yourself between the wolf and the lamb, even if it costs you. He managed a small smile. Besides, I could use the company. Ranch gets lonely. Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Just survive. That's all I ask. Morrison cleared his throat. If you're serious about this, we can do it today. I can perform the ceremony right here. But you need to be certain, both of you. Marriage isn't something to take lightly, even a marriage of convenience. I'm certain, Silas said. Eliza wiped her eyes. So am I. Ruth looked between them, then shook her head slowly. You're both crazy. You know that, right? Probably, Silas agreed. But crazy beats dead. The ceremony took 10 minutes. Morrison had them stand before his desk. Ruth and Mrs. Chen summoned hastily from the boarding house as witnesses. There were no rings, no flowers, no music. Just Morrison's voice reading from a book asking the same questions people had been asking for centuries. Do you, Silas Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Eliza Morgan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Eliza's voice was steady. I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Morrison closed the book. Mr. Brennan, you may kiss your bride. Silas hesitated. It felt wrong kissing her when this wasn't real, when they were just playing roles. But Eliza stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek, quick and chaste, and whispered, Thank you. Morrison handed them the marriage certificate, officially stamped and registered. Congratulations, Mrs. Brennan. You're now legally free of Harrison Whitmore. The name hit her visibly. Mrs. Brennan, a new identity, a new life. What happens now? She asked. Now we wait for Harrison to find out and lose his mind. Ruth folded her arms. Because he will. And when he does, he's going to come after both of you. Let him come, Silas said. He's got no legal standing anymore. He threatens her. He threatens my wife. And that's a crime whether the sheriff likes it or not. Law and justice ain't always the same thing, Silas. You know that. Then we'll make them the same. They spent that night at the boarding house again, but this time Silas took the room next to Eliza's, next to his wife's, he corrected himself. The thought felt strange, like wearing someone else's boots. He sat on the narrow bed, staring at the marriage certificate, wondering what Mary would think of this. Would she understand? Would she be angry that he'd married someone else, even if it was just on paper? He thought she would understand. Mary had never been the jealous type. She'd been practical, clear-eyed about the world and its cruelties. She would have looked at Eliza's bruises and said, Do what needs doing, Silas. I'll wait. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Eliza standing there in a borrowed nightgown, her hair damp from washing. Can I come in? She asked. Of course. She entered, closing the door behind her, then just stood there wringing her hands. I wanted to say, I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you did this because you felt obligated, or because of your wife, or I did it because it was right. But now you're tied to me, legally. And if Harrison comes after us, then I'll deal with Harrison. Silas gestured to the chair. Sit, please. You're making me nervous with all that fidgeting. She sat perching on the edge like she might bolt any second. What do we tell people when we go back to your ranch? The truth mostly. That you came to me hurt and scared, that I helped you, that we grew close during your recovery. People believe what they want to believe. They want romance, we'll give them romance. You make it sound easy. It ain't easy, but it's simpler than the alternative. He leaned back against the wall. Listen, Eliza. This marriage, it's real on paper, and that's what matters. But it doesn't have to be real in any other way unless you want it to be. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't. I'm not expecting anything from you. I know. She looked down at her hands. You're not like him. You're nothing like him. Good. Because if I ever start acting like him, I want you to shoot me. She laughed, surprised and genuine. I don't know how to shoot. Then I'll teach you. Every woman should know how to defend herself. Maybe if... He stopped himself. Maybe if I'd known how to shoot, I could have stopped Harrison sooner. She finished for him. I've thought that too, but I was scared, and he was always so much bigger, so much stronger. Fear makes sense. What doesn't make sense is how nobody helped you. How many people knew and looked away? Mrs. Keller knew. Pastor Thompson suspected, I think. Even some of Harrison's business partners, I'd see them looking at me with pity. But nobody did anything. Because he was important. Because I was nobody. You're not nobody. Silas's voice came out fiercer than he intended. You're somebody, Eliza. You're brave and strong, and you survived something that would have broken most people. And now you're my wife, which means you've got a name and a home, and a man who'll stand between you and anyone who tries to hurt you again. That makes you somebody. She started crying again, but different this time. Not from pain or fear, but from something that looked almost like relief. I should go, she said, standing and wiping her eyes. Let you sleep. Eliza. She paused at the door. We're going to get through this. All of it, I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. She smiled small and hesitant, then slipped out into the hall. Silas listened to her footsteps, the creak of her door opening and closing, and then silence. He lay awake for hours, his rifle beside him, listening to the town settle into sleep. Somewhere out there, Harrison was probably doing the same thing, lying awake, planning his next move. The difference was, Harrison was planning how to hurt people. Silas was planning how to protect them. Morning came with news. Ruth arrived at breakfast with a newspaper, her expression grim. She slapped it on the table in front of them. The headline read, Local businessman's stepdaughter elopes with mysterious rancher Whitmore family in turmoil. Silas read the article while his coffee went cold. It painted Harrison as the victim, a bereaved widower trying to care for his unstable stepdaughter, only to have her stolen away by an opportunistic older man. There were quotes from friends of the family expressing shock and concern. There was speculation about Eliza's mental state suggestions that she'd been coerced. Who wrote this? He asked. Editor's name is Thaddeus Grant. He and Harrison are drinking buddies. Ruth poured herself coffee. It's character assassination, pure and simple. By this evening, everyone in town will think you're a predator and she's a victim. But we have the marriage license, Eliza said. We have proof it was legal. Legal doesn't matter when public opinion's already made up its mind. Ruth tapped the paper. This is Harrison's counterattack. He can't get you back legally, so he's going to destroy your reputation instead. Make you social pariahs. Force you to leave town. Maybe we should leave, Eliza said quietly. Go back to the ranch. Let this blow over. It won't blow over. It'll follow you. Ruth leaned forward. I've seen this before. Men like Harrison, they can't stand losing. It's not even about you anymore, Eliza. It's about his ego. About proving he's still in control. He'll spend every dollar he has to make your lives miserable. Then what do? Silas asked. We fight back. But not with guns, with truth. Ruth pulled out her notebook. I've been doing some digging. Harrison's business dealings aren't exactly clean. He's got debts, bad investments, contracts that favor him a little too conveniently. And I've found 3 other families who had daughters working in his household. Girls who left suddenly under mysterious circumstances. Eliza sat up straighter. You think I think he's done this before. And if we can get those girls to talk, we can show a pattern. That's what courts look for, patterns of behavior. 1 victim can be dismissed as a liar. 4 victims with similar stories. That's evidence. Will they talk? Silas asked. That's what I need to find out, but it'll take time. And meanwhile, you 2 need to go back to the ranch and live your lives like none of this matters. Go to church, go to town for supplies. Show everyone you're not ashamed and you're not running. That's asking a lot, Eliza said. I know, but it's the only way. You hide, you look guilty. You stand tall, you make people question the narrative Harrison's selling. Silas thought about it, weighing options. Ruth was right. Running wouldn't solve anything. But staying meant exposing Eliza to more cruelty, more judgment. More people looking at her like she was either a liar or a fool. What do you want to do? He asked Eliza. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the newspaper, at the lies printed there in black and white. Then she lifted her chin, and Silas saw something new in her eyes. Not just survival instinct, but determination. I want to fight, she said. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of running. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's show everyone who Harrison Whitmore really is. Ruth smiled. That's the spirit. They left Cheyenne that afternoon, the 3 of them riding out under a gray sky that threatened rain. People watched from windows and doorways, whispering behind their hands. Silas heard fragments of conversation as they passed. Shameful. Poor Mr. Whitmore. Girl's a harlot. Eliza kept her head high, her hands steady on the reins. She didn't look at the watchers, didn't acknowledge their judgment. Just rode straight and proud, like she had every right to be there. Which she did. She was his wife now. Let them choke on that. They were 2 miles outside town when the riders appeared behind them. 6 men this time, Harrison among them, mounted on his black stallion and flanked by men who looked like they killed for wages. Ruth saw them first. We got company. Silas turned in his saddle. The riders were closing fast, not bothering with subtlety. This was a show of force. Keep riding, he told Eliza. Don't stop, don't look back. Silas, do it. Ruth and Silas slowed their horses, letting Eliza get ahead, then turned to face the approaching riders. They stopped 50 yards apart, close enough to talk, far enough to have time if shooting started. Harrison was smiling. That same smooth, cultured smile that probably charmed widows and business partners. Up close, Silas could see the resemblance to a well-fed snake. Mr. Brennan, Harrison called out pleasantly. Congratulations on your marriage. Such a whirlwind romance. What do you want, Whitmore? Want why? I just wanted to offer my blessing. And perhaps a word of advice. His smile widened. That girl you married, she's troubled. Unstable. Prone to delusions and false accusations. I tried my best to care for her after her mother died, but some people simply can't be helped. That's not true, Ruth said coldly. And you know it. Do I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a mentally ill girl, seduced a lonely widower, and now she's going to ruin his life the same way she ruined mine. Harrison leaned forward in his saddle. Mark my words, Brennan. She'll accuse you next. She'll claim you hurt her. And when she does, nobody will believe her because she's already proven herself a liar. Get off my land, Silas said. Your land. This is open territory. I can ride wherever I please. Harrison's eyes were cold now, all pretense dropped. But you're right about one thing, this conversation is over. For now. I'll be seeing you both very soon. After all, we're practically family. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. They disappeared over a rise, leaving nothing but dust and the sick feeling in Silas's gut that this was far from finished. Eliza was waiting at the next creek crossing, her face pale. What did he say? Nothing that matters. Silas dismounted, checked his horse's hooves to give his hands something to do. He's trying to scare us, that's all. It's working. I know, but fear's just a feeling. It doesn't have to control what you do. Ruth rode up beside them. He's building a narrative, trying to make you look like the villain before the truth comes out. We need to move faster. I'm going to ride to Laramie, talk to those other families. You two get back to the ranch and stay put until I return. How long will you be gone? Eliza asked. Week, maybe 2. Depends on what I find. Ruth looked at Silas. You've got enough supplies. Enough. We'll manage. Keep your eyes open. Harrison's not going to give up just because you got married. If anything, it'll make him more desperate. She touched her badge. And if he tries anything at all, you defend yourselves. The law will back you. Will it, though? Silas asked, with the sheriff in his pocket. The sheriff's jurisdiction ends at the county line. Federal marshals answer to a different authority. And I've already sent word to Denver. If Harrison makes a move, we'll have backup. She tipped her hat to Eliza. You're going to be fine, Mrs. Brennan. Just stay strong. Then she was gone, riding hard toward the northwest, leaving Silas and Eliza alone with the wind and the gathering storm. They reached the ranch as the first drops of rain began to fall. The cabin looked exactly as Silas had left it, small weathered home. He helped Eliza dismount, noticed how exhausted she looked. Go inside, he said gently. I'll tend the horses. I can help. I know you can, but you've had a hell of a few days. Rest, please. She didn't argue, just walked slowly to the cabin while Silas led the horses to the barn. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof, turning the yard to mud. He worked mechanically, unsaddling, brushing, feeding, letting the familiar motions calm his racing mind. When he finally went inside, he found Eliza standing at the window watching the rain. She'd changed into dry clothes, one of Mary's old dresses that fit better now that she'd gained a little weight. It's beautiful, she said without turning. The rain. We never got much rain in St. Louis, not like this. Wyoming rain's different. Comes hard and fast, then leaves everything clean. He hung his wet coat on the peg. You hungry? Not really. You should eat anyway. Keep your strength up. She turned to face him, and he saw she'd been crying. I'm sorry. For what? For dragging you into this. For making you marry me. For... Stop. He crossed to her, put his hands on her shoulders. You didn't drag me into anything. I chose this, and I'd choose it again. Why? You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. But I owe Mary. I owe Grace. And I owe every man who died believing he was protecting something worth protecting. His voice roughened. I couldn't save them, but maybe I can save you, and maybe that's enough. She threw her arms around him, buried her face in his chest and sobbed. Not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching cries that shook her whole body. Silas held her one hand in her choppy hair, the other on her back, and let her cry until there was nothing left. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 2 damaged people held each other and tried to believe they might actually survive this. And somewhere in the darkness, Harrison Whitmore was planning his next move. The rain stopped 3 days later, leaving the world scrubbed clean and smelling of wet sage. Silas taught Eliza how to shoot during those days, setting up bottles on fence posts and standing behind her while she learned to hold the rifle steady, to breathe out before squeezing the trigger, to accept the kick without flinching. You're pulling left, he said on the 3rd morning, watching her miss the same bottle for the 10th time. You're anticipating the recoil. I can't help it. It's loud. Everything's loud in a fight. You gotta push through it. He moved closer, adjusted her stance. Feet shoulder-width apart. Weight forward. The gun's gonna kick, let it. Don't fight it, just come back to center and aim again. She fired. The bottle exploded. There, Silas said, and he heard the pride in his own voice. That's it. Eliza lowered the rifle, grinning. It was the first real smile he'd seen on her face since the wedding. "I did it." "You did. Now do it 4 more times." By the end of the week, she could hit 5 out of 6 bottles. Not perfect, but good enough to defend herself if it came to that. Silas hoped it wouldn't come to that. But hope and preparation were different things, and he'd learned in the war to always prepare for the worst. They fell into a rhythm, the two of them. Silas would wake before dawn, tend the animals, check the property line for signs of intruders. Eliza would make breakfast. She was learning to cook on the wood stove, burning things at first, but getting better. They'd work together during the day, mending fences or hauling water, or the 1,000 other tasks a ranch demanded. At night, they'd sit on the porch and watch the stars come out, not talking much, just existing in the same space. It felt almost normal, almost like a real marriage. And that scared Silas more than he wanted to admit, because normal meant attachment, and attachment meant pain when it inevitably ended. Ruth returned on the 8th day, riding hard and looking like she'd aged 5 years. She dismounted in the yard, her face grim. "Found them," she said without preamble. 3 girls. 4 actually, but one's dead. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. "Dead. Suicide. Threw herself in front of a train 2 years ago." Ruth accepted the water Silas offered, drank deep. "Her sister told me she'd worked in Harrison's house for 6 months. Came home different. Wouldn't talk about what happened, wouldn't let anyone touch her. Then one day she just walked to the tracks and waited." "God," Silas breathed. "The other 3 are alive but terrified. 2 of them refused to talk at all, said they'd signed agreements with Harrison confidentiality contracts that paid them to keep quiet. The 3rd one, a girl named Margaret Reese, she was willing to talk, but only if we guarantee her safety." "What did she say?" Eliza asked. Ruth looked at her, and Silas saw something like sorrow in the marshal's eyes. "Same story as yours. He hired her as a maid. Started coming to her room at night. Told her nobody would believe her because he was important. When she threatened to go to the sheriff, he had her arrested for theft, planted jewelry in her room, and called the law. She spent 2 weeks in jail before he dropped the charges, said he'd been mistaken. But the message was clear. He's done this over and over," Eliza said, her voice shaking. "And nobody stopped him. Because he's rich and connected and knows how to use the system against his victims." Ruth pulled out her notebook. "But Margaret's willing to testify. And I think if she does, the other 2 might find their courage. 4 victims with identical stories. That's a pattern even Harrison's lawyers can't explain away." "When?" Silas asked. "Judge Morrison's calling a grand jury hearing in 3 weeks. If they indict Harrison, goes to trial." Ruth looked between them. "It's going to get ugly. His lawyers will attack every one of you. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made, every lie you've ever told, every reason people might doubt you." "I don't care," Eliza said. "Let them try. I'm not hiding anymore." But hiding found them anyway 2 days later in the form of fire. Silas smelled the smoke before he saw the flames. He was in the barn repairing a broken harness when the wind shifted and brought the acrid scent of burning grass. He dropped the leather and ran outside. The western pasture was ablaze, flames racing toward the house, driven by the steady wind. He could see figures on horseback at the far edge of the fire silhouettes against the orange glow, and he knew, without seeing their faces, who they were. "Eliza!" he shouted, running for the cabin. "Fire! We gotta move!" She appeared in the doorway, saw the flames, and went pale. "Oh, God!" "Get the horses out of the barn. I'll try to create a fire break." He was already grabbing shovels, buckets, anything that might slow the flames. "Go now!" She ran. Silas started digging, throwing dirt on the advancing fire, but it was moving too fast. The grass was dry from summer heat, and the wind kept pushing the flames forward, hungry and relentless. Within minutes, the fire was 100 yards from the cabin. Eliza emerged from the barn leading both horses, her eyes streaming from smoke. "It's too fast. We can't stop it." She was right. The cabin, the barn, everything he'd built with Mary, it was all going to burn. Silas felt something break inside him, a sound like snapping wood, but there wasn't time for grief. "The creek," he said. "We can shelter there. Come on." They ran, pulling the panicked horses, while behind them the fire consumed his life. They splashed into the creek bed, the water only ankle-deep this time of year, and turned to watch. The flames hit the barn first, engulfing it in seconds. Then the cabin. The roof caught, and the walls seemed to exhale smoke before collapsing inward. Everything Mary had touched, every memory of Grace, gone. Just gone. Eliza grabbed his hand, squeezed hard. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. The riders appeared through the smoke, 4 of them, and Silas recognized Clay in the lead. They stopped at the edge of the fire, backlit by the destruction they'd caused, and Clay raised his hat in mock salute before riding off. "They're leaving," Eliza whispered. "Why are they leaving?" "Because they got what they came for." Silas's voice sounded dead even to his own ears. "They wanted to send a message. Message sent." They stayed in the creek until the fire burned itself out, leaving nothing but smoking ruins and the skeleton of what used to be home. When they finally climbed out, shaking and covered in ash, the sun was setting. Silas walked through the wreckage in a daze. The cabin was gone, just a blackened foundation and twisted metal from the stove. The barn was worse, nothing but charred beams. He found the remains of the trunk, Mary's trunk, and knelt beside it. The wood had burned away, but inside, protected by some miracle, was Mary's wedding ring. He picked it up, still warm, and closed his fist around it. "Silas." Eliza's voice was gentle. "We should go, before they come back." "Where?" He looked up at her, this girl who'd brought nothing but trouble into his life, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "Where do we go?" "Town. Ruth's there. She'll help us." "Help us do what? Start over? With what money? What prospects?" He laughed, bitter and harsh. "I got nothing left, Eliza. Nothing." "You have me." "Yeah. And look where that got me." He regretted the words the moment they left his mouth. Saw the way she flinched, like he'd struck her. But he was too tired and too angry to take them back. "You're right," she said quietly. "This is my fault. Harrison did this because of me, so I'll fix it." "How?" "I'll go back to him. Tell him I made a mistake, that I want to come home. Maybe if I do that, he'll leave you alone." "No." Silas stood, grabbed her shoulders. "No, you're not going back to him." "What choice do we have? He's going to keep destroying everything you have until there's nothing left. At least if I go back, then he wins, and you die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Is that what you want? I want you to have a life." She was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the ash on her face. "You helped me. You married me. You lost everything because of me. The least I can do is—" "The least you can do is survive." His grip tightened. "You hear me? Mary and Grace died and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save them. But I can save you. And I'll be damned if I let you throw your life away because some monster decided to burn my house down. But, no buts. We're going to town. We're going to tell Ruth what happened. And then we're going to watch Harrison Whitmore burn the same way he burned my ranch. Legally. Publicly. With everyone watching." He let her go, stepped back. "That's the only way this ends. Not with you sacrificing yourself. With him in chains." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, okay." They rode to Cheyenne through the night, pushing the horses hard, arriving at Ruth's office just before dawn. The marshal took one look at them, covered in ash and soot, exhausted and hollow-eyed, and knew. "Harrison?" she asked. "His men. Set fire to the western pasture. Let it spread to the buildings." Silas's voice was flat. "Everything's gone." Ruth's face went hard as granite. "That's arson. That's attempted murder. I can arrest him for this." "Can you prove it was his men? You saw them, didn't you? Saw silhouettes in the smoke. Could have been anyone." Silas slumped into a chair. His lawyers will say we're making it up, that the fire was natural, that we're just looking for someone to blame. Then we make him so nervous he makes a mistake. Ruth pulled out paper, started writing. I'm going to the federal marshal in Denver getting a warrant for Harrison's arrest based on Margaret's testimony and the other evidence. Once he's in custody, we search his property, find proof he ordered the arson. That'll take weeks, Eliza said. Maybe. But in the meantime, you two need to stay somewhere safe. Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Is the first place he'll look? Silas interrupted. We need to disappear. Completely. Until the trial. Disappear where? Silas thought for a moment, then remembered. Fort Laramie. Colonel Chambers. He owes me from the war, and Harrison's influence doesn't reach onto federal military property. Ruth nodded slowly. That could work. I can escort you there, make sure you arrive safely. Then I'll head to Denver and get that warrant. How long do we have to stay there? Until the trial. Could be a month. Could be 3. She looked at Eliza. You up for that, living on a military fort? I'm up for anything that keeps me away from Harrison. They left that morning, riding north under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Silas kept thinking about the cabin, about Mary's things burning, about 15 years of his life reduced to ash and memory. He'd rebuilt once after the war, after Mary and Grace died. Could he do it again? Did he even want to? Eliza rode beside him, silent and withdrawn. He knew she was blaming herself, carrying the weight of his loss like it was hers to carry. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that Harrison was the one to blame, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe because part of him, the angry, exhausted part, did blame her. Blamed her for running to his ranch, for bringing Harrison's attention down on him, for making him care about someone again. That part of him was wrong, and he knew it. But knowing something and feeling it were different things. They reached Fort Laramie 3 days later. Colonel Chambers met them at the gate, older and grayer than Silas remembered, but still standing straight as a lodgepole pine. Brennan, the colonel said, gripping his hand. Been a long time. Yes, sir, too long. Heard you got yourself married. Congratulations. Chambers looked at Eliza, and something in his expression softened. Ma'am, welcome to Fort Laramie. You'll be safe here. Thank you, Colonel. Don't thank me yet. Army life's not easy even for guests. But we've got a spare officer's quarters you can use, and nobody gets on this fort without my permission. Harrison Whitmore included. They settled into the small house, 2 rooms and a kitchen, sparse but clean. That first night, Silas sat on the porch while Eliza slept inside, and Chambers joined him with a bottle of whiskey. Want to talk about it? The colonel asked, pouring 2 glasses. Not much to talk about. I helped a girl. Now I'm paying the price. That's one way to see it. Other way is you did the right thing, and evil pushed back. That's what evil does. It fights hardest when it's losing. Doesn't feel like he's losing. Feels like he's winning. Because you're counting the wrong things. Chambers sipped his whiskey. He burned your ranch. So what buildings can be rebuilt? But that girl in there, she's alive. She's fighting. That's because of you. You gave her that chance, and no fire can take that away. Silas wanted to believe him, wanted to feel like his sacrifice meant something, but all he felt was tired. How long did it take you? He asked. After the war, how long before you felt normal again? Chambers laughed, dark and low. I'll let you know when it happens. But Silas, normal's overrated. What matters is finding a reason to keep going. Sounds like you got one sleeping in that room. She's not. We're not. It's complicated. Love usually is. I don't love her. The words came out too fast, too defensive. I barely know her. Then why'd you marry her? To protect her. Uh-huh. And why'd you stand between her and Harrison's men? Why'd you let your ranch burn rather than hand her over? Silas didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was complicated and terrifying, and something he wasn't ready to examine. Give it time, Chambers said, standing. You might surprise yourself. After the colonel left, Silas sat alone with his whiskey and his thoughts. Inside, he heard Eliza moving around, settling in for the night. He thought about going in, checking on her, making sure she was all right. But he stayed on the porch, keeping watch, doing what he did best, protecting her from everything except his own confused heart. Days turned to weeks at Fort Laramie. Ruth sent word that the federal warrant had been issued, that Harrison had been arrested and released on bond, that the trial was set for October. Margaret and one other girl had agreed to testify. The third was still too scared, but 2 victims plus Eliza might be enough. Might be. Silas spent his days helping with repairs around the fort, keeping busy, trying not to think. Eliza spent hers with the officers' wives, learning to sew and cook properly, absorbing their stories of military life and hardship, and making do with less. They were polite to each other, careful like strangers sharing a house. Which is what they were, really. Strangers bound by law and circumstance, and a monster who wouldn't let go. One evening, 3 weeks into their stay, Eliza found Silas in the stable brushing down one of the cavalry horses. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Sure." Really talk, not just existing in the same space and pretending everything's fine. He set down the brush, turned to face her. "What do you want to talk about?" "About what you said, after the fire, that this was my fault." "I shouldn't have said that." "But you meant it. At least part of you did." She stepped closer. "And maybe you're right. Maybe I did ruin your life. But I can't change that. I can't undo what Harrison did. All I can do is—" She trailed off. "All you can do is what? Is tell you I'm sorry. And that after the trial, after this is all over, I'll give you a divorce. Set you free. Let you rebuild without me dragging you down." Something twisted in Silas's chest. "That what you want? A divorce?" "I want you to be happy. And I don't think you can be happy with me around reminding you of everything you lost." "Eliza? No, let me finish, please." She was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't bother wiping away. "You've done so much for me, more than anyone ever has. And I've given you nothing but trouble and pain and loss. So after the trial, I'll go. Maybe to Chicago, to my grandmother. Somewhere far away where Harrison can't find me, and you can forget I ever existed." "I don't want to forget you." The words surprised them both. Silas hadn't meant to say them, hadn't even known he was thinking them, until they were out in the air between them. "You don't?" Eliza's voice was small, uncertain. "No. Because you—" He struggled for words. "You remind me that there's still good in the world. That people are worth fighting for. Mary and Grace, losing them broke something in me. Made me think the world was just pain and cruelty and nothing else. But then you showed up, all that courage wrapped up in terror, and you made me remember why I fought in the first place. Why any of us fight. I'm not brave. I'm just trying to survive. That's what brave is. Doing what needs doing even when you're scared." He closed the distance between them, put his hands on her shoulders like he had that night after the fire. "And yeah, I lost my ranch. I lost 15 years of memories. But I gained something too. I gained purpose. I gained—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "I gained you." She looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want a divorce. I'm saying this marriage, maybe it started as protection, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Maybe we could—" He took a breath. "Maybe we could make it real." "Silas." She breathed his name like a prayer. "Are you sure? Because I won't let you do this out of obligation or pity or—" He kissed her. Not hard, not demanding, just a gentle press of his lips to hers, asking a question. She answered by kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his chest. "I was so scared you hated me," she whispered. "Never. Not even close." He stroked her choppy hair, marveling at how right this felt. I just needed time to figure out what I was feeling, what this was. And what is it? Honestly, I don't know yet, but I want to find out, if you're willing. She pulled back, looked up at him with those green eyes that had haunted him since the day she collapsed at his gate. I'm willing. God help me, I'm willing. They stood there in the stable holding each other, while the horses shifted and the evening light faded. And for the first time since the fire, Silas felt something other than loss. He felt hope. And somewhere in Cheyenne, Harrison Whitmore sat in his mansion and planned his defense, unaware that he'd already lost the thing that mattered most. He'd lost their fear. The trial began on a Tuesday in October, when the leaves were turning gold and the air carried the first bite of winter. Silas and Eliza rode into Cheyenne with Colonel Chambers and a detachment of cavalry soldiers. The colonel had insisted on the escort, said he didn't trust Harrison not to try something desperate. Turned out, he was right to worry. They were a mile outside town when the shots rang out. 3 riders came out of the tree line, guns blazing, aiming for Eliza. The cavalry returned fire immediately, and the ambush turned into a running firefight that left one of Harrison's men dead, and the other 2 fleeing toward the hills. "You all right?" Silas asked Eliza, who'd gone white as snow but kept her seat. "I'm fine, just scared." "Good. Scared keeps you alert." He checked his rifle, made sure it was loaded. "They're getting desperate. That's when men are most dangerous." Colonel Chambers rode up beside them, his face grim. "That was an assassination attempt. Plain as day. I'm sending word ahead to Judge Morrison. Harrison just bought himself another charge." The courthouse was surrounded by people when they arrived. Some held signs supporting Harrison, "Innocent until proven guilty," and "Stand with our community leaders." Others held signs supporting the victims, "Believe women," and "Justice for the voiceless." The crowd parted as the cavalry rode through, and Silas heard the whispers. "That's her. The one who married the rancher. Shameless. Brave. Liar. Survivor." Inside the courtroom smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. Ruth was already there, standing with Margaret Reese, and another young woman Silas didn't recognize, the second victim who'd agreed to testify. Both looked terrified but determined. "Margaret, this is Eliza Brennan," Ruth said, making introductions. "And this is Clara Finch. She worked for Harrison 4 years ago." The 3 women looked at each other, and something passed between them. Recognition, solidarity, the understanding that comes from surviving the same nightmare. "Thank you for coming," Eliza said to them. "I know this isn't easy." "Neither is living with what he did," Margaret replied. Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "If speaking up means one less girl gets hurt, then it's worth it." Harrison entered through a side door flanked by 2 expensive lawyers in tailored suits. He looked confident, relaxed, even like this was just another business meeting. When his eyes found Eliza, he smiled. That same charming smile that had probably fooled her mother, fooled the whole town. Silas felt Eliza's hand find his squeeze tight. He squeezed back a silent promise. "I'm here. You're not alone." Judge Morrison entered, and everyone stood. The jury filed in 12 men, no women, because Wyoming hadn't quite caught up to its own constitution yet. Silas studied their faces, trying to read them. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked skeptical. Most just looked tired, like they wished they were anywhere else. The prosecutor was a young man named Daniel Webb, fresh from law school in Denver, but sharp as a razor. He stood and began his opening statement. "Gentlemen of the jury, this case is about power, about a man who used his wealth, his position, his community standing to prey on young women under his care. You'll hear from 3 victims, 3 brave women, who will tell you identical stories. Stories of abuse, manipulation, and violence. Stories that reveal Harrison Whitmore not as the pillar of the community he pretends to be, but as a predator who has operated with impunity for years." Harrison's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Cornelius Black, stood for his opening. His voice was smooth as honey, reasonable and calm. "Gentlemen, What you're about to witness is a tragedy. Not the tragedy the prosecution describes, but the tragedy of false accusations destroying a good man's life. Harrison Whitmore is a widower who took in his stepdaughter out of love and duty. He's a businessman who gave employment to young women who needed it. And now, for reasons we'll explore during this trial, these women have conspired to ruin him. Perhaps they want money. Perhaps they want attention. Perhaps they simply can't accept responsibility for their own poor choices. But whatever their motivation, their accusations are lies. And by the end of this trial, you'll see that clearly. The first witness was Doc Patterson. He testified about Eliza's injuries, showed photographs that made the jury shift uncomfortably in their seats. Black tried to suggest the injuries could have come from her flight through the prairie, but the doctor shut that down quickly. These injuries show a pattern consistent with long-term abuse, he said firmly. Multiple healed fractures, scarring from repeated trauma, psychological indicators of sustained stress. This wasn't from one night of running. This was from months, possibly years of violence. Margaret testified next. She was shaking so hard, Ruth had to stand beside her, one hand on her shoulder for support. But her voice stayed clear as she described being hired as a maid, being cornered in the hallway, being told that if she spoke up, she'd lose everything. "He said nobody would believe me," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "Said he'd make sure I never worked again. Said he'd have me arrested for theft if I told anyone. And I believed him because he was powerful and I was nobody." Black's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her memory, suggested she'd consented, and later regretted it, implied she was testifying for money. Margaret held firm, but Silas could see the toll it took. By the time she stepped down, she looked like she'd aged 10 years. Clara's testimony was similar. Same pattern, same threats, same helplessness. The jury was starting to look uncomfortable now, shifting in their seats, avoiding Harrison's eyes. Then, it was Eliza's turn. Silas watched her walk to the witness stand, her spine straight, her chin up. She wore a simple dress, Ruth had bought her nothing fancy, and her short hair was combed back from her face. She looked young and vulnerable, and absolutely unbreakable. Webb led her through her testimony gently. She described her mother's death. Harrison's kindness at first, then the night he first came to her room. Her voice stayed steady as she detailed the 14 months of abuse, the times she'd tried to escape the beating that left her unable to walk. "Why didn't you go to the sheriff?" Webb asked. "Because Harrison was friends with the sheriff. They played cards every Thursday. How could I report him to his friend?" "Why didn't you tell anyone else?" "I did. I told our neighbor, Mrs. Keller. She said I was being dramatic. I tried to tell Pastor Thompson, but Harrison donated so much money to the church that the pastor said I must be mistaken, that Mr. Whitmore was a godly man." Eliza's voice cracked. "So I stopped telling. Because nobody believed me." "What made you finally run?" "He said we should get married, said God wanted us together, and I knew if I let that happen, I'd never escape. So I waited until he passed out drunk and I ran. I ran 15 miles barefoot through the prairie because death out there seemed better than one more night with him." The courtroom was silent. Even Black looked uncomfortable. Then he stood for cross-examination, and Silas felt his hands clench into fists. "Miss Morgan, or should I say Mrs. Brennan," Black began. "You married Mr. Silas Brennan very quickly after leaving my client's home, didn't you?" "Yes." "Within days, in fact. Barely knew the man, yet you married him. Why?" "Because I needed protection. Because your client was hunting me. Or because you saw an opportunity. A lonely widower, a ranch, financial security. Perhaps that was the real reason you left Harrison's home, not because of abuse, but because you'd found a better prospect." "That's not true." "Isn't it? You've accused my client of terrible things, but where's the proof? Where are the witnesses who saw these alleged assaults? They happened in private. That's how abuse works. Or perhaps they didn't happen at all. Perhaps you're a troubled young woman with a vivid imagination and a talent for manipulation. Black leaned forward. Tell me, Mrs. Brennan, have you ever lied to get what you want? I've never lied about this. That's not what I asked. Have you ever lied? Eliza hesitated, and Silas saw the trap. If she said no, Black would produce evidence of some childhood lie, some white lie everyone tells. If she said yes, he'd use it to paint her as a liar about everything. Everyone lies sometimes, she said carefully. But I'm not lying about what Harrison did to me. So you admit you're capable of lying. I'm capable of breathing too. That doesn't mean I'm lying now. A few people in the gallery laughed. Black's expression hardened. Let's talk about the night you left. You claim you were fleeing abuse, yet you didn't go to the sheriff, didn't seek help from neighbors or the church. Instead, you ran to a strange man's ranch in the middle of nowhere. Doesn't that seem odd? I ran to the nearest shelter. That happened to be Mr. Brennan's ranch. And how convenient that this stranger not only took you in but married you, thereby terminating Harrison's guardianship and giving you legal protection, almost like you planned it. I didn't plan anything. I just wanted to be safe. Safe. Or wealthy. Because now you're Mrs. Brennan, wife of a property owner with social standing you never had before. Quite an upgrade from being a maid's daughter, isn't it? Webb shot to his feet. Objection, counsel is harassing the witness. Sustained, Morrison said. Mr. Black, ask your questions without the editorial commentary. But the damage was done. Silas could see some jurors nodding doubt creeping into their faces. Black had planted the seed. Maybe she was lying. Maybe this was all a scheme for money and status. The cross-examination continued for another hour, Black picking at every detail, suggesting alternative explanations, painting Eliza as an opportunist rather than a victim. By the time she stepped down, she was pale and shaking, but she'd held her ground. Silas met her as she left the witness stand, put his arm around her. You did good, he whispered. I don't know. Some of them believed him. I could see it. Some, not all. That's what matters. The prosecution rested. The defense called their witnesses, character witnesses, who praised Harrison's generosity, business associates, who swore he was a man of integrity, even Pastor Thompson, who testified that Harrison was a devoted Christian who'd never do such things. Then Harrison took the stand. He was perfect. Calm, reasonable, hurt by these terrible accusations. He denied everything with just the right amount of sadness, like he was disappointed rather than angry. He described Eliza as a troubled girl he'd tried to help only to have her turn on him. I loved her mother, he said, his voice breaking. And when Rebecca died, I promised I'd care for Eliza like she was my own daughter. But she was always difficult, rebellious. She'd disappear for hours, come home with bruises, and when I'd ask where she'd been, she'd lie. I tried to be patient, tried to get her help, but nothing worked. Where do you think her bruises came from? His lawyer asked. I don't know. Sometimes I wondered if she was hurting herself looking for attention. Other times I thought maybe she had a young man she was hiding from me, someone rough. I never imagined she'd accuse me of causing them. It was masterful. He sounded like a concerned parent, bewildered and wounded by false accusations. Silas wanted to shoot him right there in the courtroom. Webb's cross-examination tried to crack Harrison's composure, but the man was slippery. Every question got deflected, every accusation got explained away. When Webb asked about the other victims, Harrison looked genuinely confused. I hired many young women over the years. I tried to help them, give them opportunities. If some of them later claimed I did something improper, I can only assume they're after money. Perhaps they heard about Eliza's accusations and saw an opportunity. Or perhaps there's a pattern, Webb shot back. 4 women with identical stories. 4 women with similar lies, perhaps coordinated. I've heard stranger conspiracies. The testimony ended. Closing arguments began. Webb painted Harrison as a predator who'd preyed on vulnerable women for years. Black painted Eliza and the others as liars and opportunists conspiring to destroy a good man. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of Silas pacing the hallway while Eliza sat motionless in a chair staring at nothing. 2 days of Ruth checking her pocket watch every 5 minutes, muttering about how long deliberations meant doubt. 2 days of hell. Finally, the jury returned. Everyone filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood a middle-aged man with a weathered face and careful eyes. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Morrison asked. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of assault, how do you find—" Silas held his breath. Eliza's hand found his, crushing his fingers. "We find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. Harrison's face went purple with rage. His lawyers immediately began shouting about appeals. But Morrison banged his gavel, restoring order. "On the charge of rape, how do you find guilty? On the additional charges of intimidation, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit arson, guilty on all counts." Morrison looked at Harrison with something like disgust. "Mr. Whitmore, I've seen a lot of evil in my years on the bench, but you represent a particular kind of moral rot. You used your position, your wealth, your community standing to brutalize young women who trusted you. You showed no remorse, only entitlement. Therefore, I sentence you to 20 years hard labor at the territorial prison with no possibility of parole." 20 years. Harrison would be nearly 60 when he got out, if he survived that long. The prisons were brutal, and rich men didn't do well there. He was screaming as the marshals dragged him away, promising revenge, swearing this wasn't over. But his voice faded as they took him down to the cells, and then there was just silence. Eliza collapsed against Silas, sobbing, not from sadness, but from relief so intense it was almost painful. Margaret and Clara were crying too, holding each other. Ruth stood off to the side with tears streaming down her face, not bothering to hide them. "It's over," Eliza whispered. "It's really over." "Yeah." Silas held her tight, breathing in the smell of her hair. "It's over." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. People filed out of the courthouse, some celebrating, some angry, most just relieved the spectacle was over. Silas led Eliza through the crowd, Ruth and the cavalry soldiers clearing a path. "What now?" Eliza asked as they mounted their horses. "Now we rebuild." Silas looked toward the western horizon, toward the blackened ruins of his ranch. "The land's still good. The water's still there. We start over. Together." He looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life bleeding and terrified, who'd somehow become the center of it. "Together. If you still want to be married to a broke rancher with nothing but debt and determination. I married you when you had even less." Whoa. She smiled, and it lit up her whole face. "Besides, I'm not completely useless. I can shoot now, and I only burn dinner half the time." "Then I guess we'll make it work." They rode out of Cheyenne as the stars came out, Colonel Chambers and his men escorting them to the fort for one last night before they headed home. The prairie stretched out before them, endless and empty and full of possibility. 3 months later, the first walls of the new cabin went up. Neighbors came to help, people who'd heard about the trial, who'd been moved by Eliza's courage, who wanted to do something good. They brought lumber and nails and labor, working from dawn to dusk until the structure took shape. Margaret came too, and Clara, no longer afraid to be seen together. They'd become friends during the trial, bound by shared trauma, but refusing to let it define them. They worked alongside Eliza, hammering and sawing, laughing at mistakes and celebrating small victories. Ruth visited when she could, bringing news from Cheyenne. Harrison was in prison, his assets seized to pay damages to his victims. His house had been sold, his business dissolved. The man who'd seemed untouchable had been erased from polite society, remembered only as a monster. By spring, the cabin was finished, bigger than the old one, with separate rooms and glass windows and a porch that faced the sunrise. Silas and Eliza moved in on a warm April day, carrying the few possessions they'd accumulated. That night, lying in their bed in their new home, Eliza turned to Silas. "Do you ever regret it?" helping me that day. Never, not once. Even when you lost everything. I didn't lose everything. I lost things. Buildings. Objects. He pulled her closer. But I gained you, and that's worth more than any ranch. I love you, she said. The first time she'd said it out loud, though they'd both felt it for months. I love you too. The words came easier than he'd expected, natural as breathing. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the new grass, carrying away the last echoes of pain and fear. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Somewhere, the world kept turning indifferent to human suffering and human joy. But here in this small cabin, built on the ashes of the old one, two people who'd been broken found a way to be whole. Not because the past was forgotten, but because they'd chosen to build something new on top of it. Justice had been served. Evil had been punished. And in the end, love had proven stronger than violence. Hope stronger than despair. And two damaged souls had found healing in each other's arms. The prairie had kept its secrets for a long time, but now it held a different kind of story, not of suffering, but of survival. Not of surrender, but of resistance. Not of victims, but of survivors who refused to let their trauma define them. And years later, when Eliza sat on that porch watching their children play in the yard, she'd remember that terrified girl who ran 15 miles barefoot to escape a monster. She'd remember the cowboy who'd stood between her and hell without hesitation. And she'd know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and the most heroic thing you can do is give it. The story didn't end with a trial or a verdict. It ended with a choice. The choice to keep living, keep loving, keep believing that tomorrow could be better than today. And in a world that often rewarded cruelty and punished kindness, that choice was nothing short of revolutionary. Silas Brennan had learned that lesson the hard way. So had Eliza. But they'd learned it together, and that made all the difference. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite it. And love isn't the absence of pain, it's choosing to heal alongside someone who understands. The Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above them, vast and indifferent and beautiful. And beneath it, two people who'd survived the worst humanity had to offer built a life worth living. Not perfect, not painless, but honest and real and theirs. And sometimes that's the only happy ending that matters.